We have this picture of Neanderthals. It's usually a guy. He has a big brow ridge and a bigger club. He's dragging a giant piece of meat back to a cave. He's a hunter, a carnivore. His whole life is about the mammoth, the woolly rhino, the giant deer. For a long time, that was the story. It was simple. Neanderthals ate meat, lots of it, and when the big animals disappeared, so did they. But that story, like most simple stories, isn't the whole truth. It's not even close. The real story is far more complex, more interesting, and makes Neanderthals seem a lot more like us. The question is, how do we know? They didn't leave behind cookbooks or shopping lists. They left behind bones, tools, and their own bodies. And for decades, scientists have been learning to read these clues like a book. It's a story written in chemistry, in microscopic scratches, and even in fossilized plaque on their teeth. The most obvious place to start is with the bones. Not the Neanderthal bones, but the animal bones found alongside them. In caves and rock shelters across Europe and Asia, archaeologists have found huge piles of animal remains. These aren't just random bones scattered by scavengers, they are the leftovers from countless meals. For years, this was our main source of information. At a site in Germany, you might find thousands of bones from horses and reindeer. At another in France, the remains of bison. And in some places, the bones of truly massive animals like mammoths and woolly rhinos dominate the collection. This evidence is powerful. It tells us what was on the menu. Clearly, they were capable hunters. They could bring down animals much larger and faster than themselves. That takes intelligence, planning, and cooperation. But finding animal bones in a cave doesn't automatically mean Neanderthals hunted and ate them. Maybe they just found the animals already dead. Maybe hyenas dragged the carcasses in. How can we tell the difference? We have to look closer at the bones themselves. This is where the real detective work begins. Using powerful microscopes, scientists examine the surface of these ancient bones for marks. A hyena's tooth leaves a certain kind of puncture mark. A wolf's jaw leaves a crushing pattern. But a stone tool, made and used by a Neanderthal, leaves a very specific signature. It leaves long, thin, V-shaped grooves. These are cut marks. And we find these cut marks all over the animal bones at Neanderthal sites. We find them on the ribs and leg bones, right where the best cuts of meat are. This shows they were butchering these animals, stripping the muscle from the bone. We also find percussion marks, little impact craters, where they used a hammerstone to crack open the bones. Why would they do that? To get to the marrow inside. Bone marrow is incredibly rich in fat and calories. It's a superfood. No scavenger would bother to do this so systematically. This was a deliberate act by a creature who knew exactly what it was doing. The location of the cut marks is also a clue. If the Neanderthal cut marks are on top of carnivore tooth marks, it suggests the Neanderthals scavenged the kill from another predator. They got there second, but what we usually find is the opposite. We find Neanderthal cut marks deep on the bone, with hyena tooth marks layered on top. This means the Neanderthals got there first, they made the kill, took the best parts, and left the scraps for the hyenas. They were the top of the food chain. The stone tools themselves tell another part of the story. Neanderthals were master toolmakers. Their signature toolkit is called the Mousterian industry. It includes specialized tools for different jobs. They had sharp points, likely hafted onto wooden spears for hunting. They had long, sharp flakes used as knives for butchering. They had scrapers, probably for cleaning animal hides. The tools they made and the wear and tear on them reflect a life focused on processing large animals. So, for a very long time, the evidence from bones and tools painted a clear picture. Neanderthals were apex predators. They were hypercarnivores living almost exclusively on the meat of large and medium-sized mammals. This view fit the cold, harsh environment of Ice Age Europe. In a world covered in ice and tundra, what else was there to eat? This was the dominant scientific view for most of the 20th century. It made sense. But it was incomplete. Science is always moving forward, and new techniques were about to change everything. One of the most powerful new techniques involves looking inside the Neanderthal bones themselves. It's a field called stable isotope analysis. The basic idea is simple. You are what you eat. The chemical elements that make up your food become the chemical elements that make up your body, including your bones. Let's break that down. We are all made of elements like carbon and nitrogen. But not all carbon atoms are the same. Some are a little heavier, some a little lighter. These different versions are called isotopes. The same is true for nitrogen. When you eat a plant, you absorb the plant's specific ratio of heavy to light carbon and nitrogen isotopes. When an animal eats that plant, it absorbs those isotopes, and when another animal, say a Neanderthal, eats that herbivore, the isotopes are passed up the food chain again. With each step up the food chain, the ratio changes in a predictable way. Specifically, the amount of the heavy nitrogen isotope nitrogen-15 increases. A plant has a very low level of nitrogen-15. An herbivore that eats the plant will have a higher level. A carnivore that eats the herbivore will have an even higher level. By measuring the amount of nitrogen-15 in a fossilized bone, we can tell exactly where that creature sat on the food chain. To do this, scientists take a tiny sample of bone, usually from a rib or a leg bone. They need a part that has good preservation of a protein called collagen. Collagen is the stuff that holds our bones together, and it locks in the isotopic signature of the food we ate over many years. They drill out a small amount of bone powder, put it through a series of chemical baths to isolate the collagen, and then run it through a machine called a mass spectrometer. This machine sorts the atoms by weight and gives a precise measurement of the isotope ratios. When scientists first started doing this with Neanderthal bones from sites across Europe, the results were stunning. The nitrogen-15 levels were incredibly high. They weren't just high like a carnivore. They were as high, and sometimes higher, than the levels found in top predators living at the same time, like cave hyenas and wolves. This was the smoking gun. The chemical evidence seemed to confirm the archaeological evidence. Neanderthals weren't just eating meat. They were at the very top of the food chain, living off the meat of large herbivores. The Neanderthal the hunter picture got a huge boost from this new high-tech science. The carbon isotopes told another part of the story. The ratio of carbon isotopes can tell you about the environment the food came from. For example, plants from an open grassy steppe have a different carbon signature than plants from a dense shady forest. By looking at the carbon in Neanderthal bones, we could see that their prey was primarily living in open environments. This matched the animal bones found at their sites, animals like mammoths, bison, and horses that grazed on the vast mammoth steppe. For a while, it seemed like the case was closed. Two completely different lines of evidence, the bones and the chemistry, were telling the same story. Neanderthals were specialized big game hunters, but science never really closes a case. It just finds new evidence. And the next piece of evidence was found in a very strange place inside their mouths. Our mouths are full of bacteria. These bacteria, along with bits of food and minerals from our saliva, form a hard substance on our teeth. We call it tartar or dental calculus. Dentists scrape it off. For archaeologists, this fossilized plaque is a time capsule. It's a tiny, rock-hard block of history stuck to the teeth of a person who died tens of thousands of years ago. And trapped inside it is direct evidence of what they put in their mouth. A researcher named Amanda Henry was one of the pioneers of this technique. She and her team looked at Neanderthal teeth from sites in Iraq and Belgium. They carefully scraped off the dental calculus, embedded it in resin, and sliced it into paper-thin sections. Then they looked at it under a high-powered microscope. What they found changed our understanding of the Neanderthal diet forever. Trapped inside the calculus were tiny starch grains. Starch is the main energy source in plants like roots, tubers, and seeds. The amazing thing about starch grains is that different plants have differently shaped grains. A potato starch grain looks different from a wheat starch grain, which looks different from a barley starch grain. By identifying the shapes of these ancient starch grains, the team could identify the types of plants the Neanderthals were eating. They found starch grains from wild grasses related to modern wheat and barley. They found evidence of legumes like peas or beans. They found starch from date palms. And they found starch from underground tubers and roots. This was undeniable proof. Neanderthals were not just carnivores. They were eating a variety of plants. But the discovery went even further. Many of the starch grains were damaged in a specific way. They were gelatinized. This is a change that happens to starch when it's cooked. The Neanderthals weren't just chewing on raw roots, they were cooking their vegetables. This implies a level of sophistication we hadn't fully appreciated. Cooking not only makes many plants more palatable, it also makes them easier to digest and unlocks more of their nutrients. The team also found other microscopic plant remains called phytoliths. These are tiny glassy structures made of silica that form inside plant cells. Like starch grains, different plants produce different shaped phytoliths. They are like a plant's skeleton, and they survive for hundreds of thousands of years. The phytoliths confirmed the starch grain evidence, showing a wide range of plant foods in the Neanderthal diet. This new evidence created a puzzle. The isotopes said Neanderthals were top-level carnivores. Their teeth said they were eating plants. How could both be true? The answer lies in understanding what each technique actually measures. The stable isotopes in bone collagen primarily reflect the protein in your diet. Because meat is so much richer in protein than most plants, the isotope signature is heavily skewed towards the animal food you eat. If you eat a huge steak and a small side salad, your long-term protein signature will look almost entirely like a carnivore's. The calculus on your teeth, however, traps physical bits of everything that goes into your mouth. It captures the steak and the salad, so the two lines of evidence weren't contradicting each other. They were complementing each other. They were showing us a more complete picture. The Neanderthals got the vast majority of their protein from meat, which is why they looked like top predators in the isotope analysis. But they were also supplementing their diet with a variety of cooked plant foods. They were omnivores with a heavy emphasis on meat. The surprises in the dental calculus didn't stop with food. At a site called El Sidron in Spain, researchers found something even more remarkable. In the calculus of one Neanderthal who clearly had a dental abscess and a stomach parasite, they found chemical traces of medicinal plants. They found poplar, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. And they found traces of the mold penicillium, the source of penicillin. It seems this individual was self-medicating. They also found traces of chamomile and yarrow in the calculus of other Neanderthals, plants known for their bitter taste but also for their medicinal properties. This discovery was profound. It suggested that Neanderthals weren't just eating for calories. They had a deep working knowledge of their local environment. They knew which plants could heal them. This is not the behavior of a brutish, meat-obsessed caveman. This is the behavior of a thoughtful, knowledgeable human. There is one more line of evidence, perhaps the most direct of all. It's also the least glamorous. It's poop. Fossilized feces are called coprolites. They are incredibly rare because they usually decay very quickly. But under the right conditions, in a very dry cave, for instance, they can be preserved for millennia. And they contain the undigested remains of the last few meals a person ate. At another site in Spain called El Salt, a team of researchers got lucky. They found what they identified as human coprolites in a layer of a Neanderthal campfire, dated to about 50,000 years ago. This was a huge find. The problem was proving they were from a Neanderthal and not a later human or an animal like a wolf. To do this, they used a biochemical approach. They tested the fossilized poop for specific compounds called sterols. Different animals produce different types of sterols in their gut. Meat eaters produce a lot of a compound called cholesterol. Plant eaters produce compounds like cytosterol. By measuring the ratio of these compounds, you can tell if the diet was primarily meat-based, plant-based, or mixed. The results from the El Salt coprolites were clear. They contained high levels of the meat-based sterol, as expected. But they also contained significant amounts of the plant-based sterols. This was the first time anyone had found direct physical evidence from a Neanderthal's gut that confirmed a mixed omnivorous diet. It was the final piece of the puzzle, confirming what the dental calculus had suggested. The Neanderthal who used this campfire had eaten both meat and plants. So what does all this evidence, taken together, tell us about what Neanderthals ate? It tells us that there is no single answer. The most important lesson we've learned is that Neanderthals were incredibly adaptable. Their diet wasn't fixed. It changed based on where they lived and when they lived. They were opportunistic and flexible, just like us. A Neanderthal living on the cold, open plains of northern Germany 60,000 years ago had a very different diet from one living on the warm Mediterranean coast of Gibraltar. The German Neanderthal would have relied heavily on migrating herds of mammoth, woolly rhino, and horse. Plants would have been scarce for much of the year. Their diet would have been almost exclusively meat, and their isotope signature reflects this. They were, for all intents and purposes, hypercarnivores by necessity. But the Gibraltar Neanderthal lived in a much richer environment. The evidence from caves there shows they were eating a huge variety of foods. Yes, they hunted land animals like ibex and red deer, but they also exploited the sea. Archaeologists have found the shells of mussels and limpets clearly harvested by Neanderthals. They found the bones of seals and even dolphins with cut marks on them. They were marine foragers. And they took advantage of the local plants. They ate pine nuts, cracking them open with stone tools. They likely ate mushrooms, berries, and roots. Their diet was broad and diverse. This regional variation is key. It shatters the old monolithic image of the Neanderthal. They weren't just one thing. They were a successful, widespread species that survived for hundreds of thousands of years through some of the most dramatic climate changes in Earth's history. They did that by being smart and adaptable. If the big game wasn't around, they'd hunt smaller animals. They'd catch birds, they'd gather shellfish, they'd dig for roots, they did what they had to do to survive. This also changes the story of their extinction. The old idea was that Neanderthals were overspecialized. They were so dependent on large ice age animals that when those animals started to disappear and when modern humans with more flexible diets arrived, the Neanderthals were doomed. They were outcompeted, but the new evidence suggests this is wrong. Neanderthals were not overspecialized. They had a varied diet, they were capable of exploiting many different food sources. So why did they disappear? The answer is probably much more complicated. It likely involves a combination of factors: rapid climate shifts, a smaller population size that was more vulnerable to disruption, competition for resources with incoming groups of Homo sapiens, and perhaps even disease. Their diet was probably not their fatal flaw. In fact, their dietary flexibility was one of their greatest strengths. So, how do we know what Neanderthals ate? We know by looking at the scraps they left behind. We look at the bones of the animals they hunted and butchered with their finely crafted stone tools. We analyze the chemistry of their own bones, which recorded the signature of their long-term diet. We peer through microscopes at the fossilized plaque on their teeth, a microscopic pantry of starches, plant fibers, and even medicines. And on rare occasions, we analyze their fossilized poop, the most direct evidence of a meal eaten 50,000 years ago. Each line of evidence provides a different piece of the puzzle. None of them, on their own, gives the full picture. The bones told us they ate meat. The isotopes told us they ate a lot of it. The dental calculus told us they also ate a wide variety of plants and cooked them. And the coprolites confirm this mixed diet. Together, they have replaced the old cartoon of a club-wielding caveman with a portrait of a complex and capable human. They were skilled hunters, knowledgeable botanists, and resourceful cooks. They were survivors who knew how to make a living from whatever the world offered them, from the frozen steppes of the north to the sunny shores of the Mediterranean. They were a lot more like us than we ever used to think.